All right, everyone. Well, good evening and welcome to week 2 of Prayer. We had a great conversation last week, seeing a lot of familiar faces, so we didn't scare anybody off, so that's good. Glad to also see some new faces. Welcome. This is week 2. We are recording tonight, so yeah. So Bruce, you need to behave. And we'll give some announcements on the back end of class tonight. So I'll just welcome. Does anybody new to the study tonight? So last week, can you just briefly say your name out loud for everybody?
Gene Johnson.
Gene Johnson.
Jim Watson.
Jim Watson.
Danette Rosenberg.
Danette Rosenberg.
Vicki Johnson.
Vicki Johnson. Who else is new? Yeah, back there.
Linda Perry.
Stowe's been here. Linda. Yep.
Kelly.
Kelly.
John Zizi.
John Zizi. Okay.
Susie Jernigan.
Susie Jernigan. Yes, you were here last week. Over here. I'm with you. I got you. All right, everyone. All right. I'm going to hand it over to Bruce, who's going to lead us in a prayer. Let me move this out of the way.
I told Shay that a couple of double entendres here. This is an app called Baby Prayer, PCUSA. You can just Google that and find it. It's in the Apple Store. It's free. It's a daily devotional. That's online. It's updated regularly. Uses the Common Lectionary or another format for the scripture lessons. But it's a full-blown devotional piece. And I thought I'd at least take the prayer from that for today to share with you, for us to share together. But so the double meaning is that check out the app and listen to the prayer, or join me in prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us give thanks to the Lord our God. It is right to give God thanks and praise. We give thanks to you, O God, creator and ruler of the universe. You made the lights of the heavens, the sun in the day to brighten and warm the earth, the moon at night, and countless stars. You gave us these lights as signs for seasons, days, months, and years. Then, in the fullness of time, you sent Jesus Christ to be the light of the world, the morning star that never fades. Let your light illumine our lives and enlighten our path until we may rest in perpetual light through Christ our Lord and in the communion of the Holy Spirit, one God now and forever. And God's people say,
Amen.
Yeah, check out that app. It's a good one.
It's not free, it's $2.99.
Okay, sorry.
I think Bruce,
Thank you, Kate.
Bruce will cover that for you. Don't worry. Sure. All right. You can pass the mic. I'm just going to be brief tonight. So I'm grateful to John and Mary and Bruce because we have kind of shared this study, and we're thinking both about our world and where we are, and also what a faithful response from our tradition looks like. So last week, you may remember, I shared the little cartoon that says, "We have met the enemy and he is us," right? From 1971, Earth Day. And so I'm gonna stay with a little light humor to start us tonight. And this is a great cartoon here. It says, "Science and religion finally agree?" Question mark. And so they're both wearing this sign that says, "The end is near." You have this person holding the Bible, and you have this person holding a book that says global warming. Right? And so what I want to say briefly is a word that gets thrown around a lot when it comes to an end of the world. You know, you may have seen the movie Apocalypse Now, or Apocalypse, or this is apocalyptic, or it's even an adjective. What I want to point out is there's lots of work being done, particularly around eco-theology or creation fear in theology or climate change in theology, that actually is taking a look at this word. And apocalypse is actually, in the Greek, it just means something being unveiled, being revealed. So when God gives Paul a revelation, it's apocalypsis, okay? So we don't necessarily have to think about end of the world, and at the same time, there are ends happening. There's species extinction and all of that going on. The end of certain, the reef, climate zones, and habitable climate for folks around the world now. And so apocalypse is a way of noticing, a way of looking around and asking the question, what is being unveiled right now? That's part one of the question. I think part two of the question is, how are we called as followers of Jesus to respond, to act, to do justice? And I want to point out something to you, and I'm about to give myself 100 Presbyterian points because I'm quoting the Book of Order.
All right. It's good stuff, y'all.
You know, in the director of worship, so note here, I'm not going to read all this, so don't worry. It says care of creation. The citation is 5 and then 0305. And I'd be happy, we'll put this in the resource page. But I want to point out a couple words. I see you grinning at me.
No,
Courtney.
because
Stop
it's
it.
just, I want to say it really is free, like.
This actually is
If
free.
you
It's
want
not
the Book of Order, it's
$2.99.
free.
Yeah. So a big thing in the Presbyterian church is that the Spirit sort of is at work and God sends the church out, right? So God sends the church to share stewardship of creation, goodness and glory of the earth God has made. Caretakers of God's creation, we are called to tend land, water, air with awe and wonder at God's gifts. Use the earth's resources wisely without plundering, polluting, or destroying. And then we'll keep kind of moving along here. Foster responsible practices of procreation, reproduction, seek beauty, order, health, harmony, peace for all of God's creatures. I'm setting John up here. But the second thing I'll say is this second paragraph is actually about our worship service. On the service of the Lord's Day, we express our care for creation by giving thanks for God's creative power and sustaining care, acknowledging this call to stewardship of the earth, confessing our failure to care for creation, rejoicing in the promise of redemption and renewal, offering our lives and resources in service to the Creator of all, committing ourselves to live as good stewards of creation until the day when God will make all things new. And so then it says, responsible choices about materials for worship, including the use of paper, sacramental elements, the construction of worship space, and other resources. So I just want to point out that fundamental to our tradition is not just the care for creation, but even in our worship services, to always keep that in back of mind, always being good stewards of what we have, what God has given, particularly as we seek to be stewards of creation around us. So I just wanted to point out, I'm going to grant myself 100 Presbyterian points, and then I'm going to hand it off to John, and we look forward to our conversation tonight.
Thank you, Shane.
Yeah, you're
Actually,
You might, go ahead, since you have the mic.
okay, I'll
Yeah.
do it. This was actually Mary's slide from last week, and we thought it was a good transition to start. Because we use this as a starting point. We're gonna move on from this, but I think we wanted to emphasize. Mary listed, and we did this 2 years ago when we did one of these here at Conan. And a list of actions that we can do to fight climate change. And it starts off with simple things: recycling, eating foods that are not harmful to the environment, valuing trees, and those sorts of personal things that you can do. As you get further down, it starts asking you to reach out a little bit, like rethink transportation. It doesn't say drive less, it says think about the whole concept of doing that better. Intentionally appreciate nature. Learn and discuss with other people about the climate. And it gets down all the way to the bottom. It says participate in government, politics, and voting. So you see the funnel. You start with your individual dedication to this. Then we move to our being here and doing it within our congregation. And then you move into the community and the state and the nation and even the globe, because that's how big this problem is.
Do you want the clicker?
Yes.
There you go. Just right there.
Okay. So does anybody want to, before I then leverage off that, Does anyone have anything they want to say? Okay, so then let's get started. You have to hit it once.
That's where church comes in, because this idea going from the individual to the collective, if the church is a collection of individuals, just like a government is a collection of voters.
No, I'm not the theologian in this group. We have two very good ones. And so I don't usually start off my talks with anything theological, but today I do. Because I was sitting in the pew a week before this past Sunday and listening to Bob Henderson's sermon, which was entitled Beautiful Mind. If you recall, the focus of of his sermons now are that we're supposed to serve God with our mind, our soul, our heart, and our strength. So we have those four components that this one was about using our mind. And he starts off by saying, we've got some big challenges in this world today. And they're fraught with, the words I have in bold are very important, with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. They're not easy things. It's not like just doing some of those early things up front, like recycling, and it's all going to get better. We have to really work hard. And the word I want to focus on there is complexity. He emphasized that it's the complexity that makes this so hard. And in order to solve these big challenges, it's going to require, and these again are Bob Henderson's words, union, which I interpret to be collaboration. We need to work together on it. Understanding, which means we really need to understand these issues because the solutions are complicated. Courage, because it's going to be slow and difficult. And adaptability. We have to accept change. And that change in our lives are going to change as we cope with climate change, for example. But climate change is just one of the major problems that this applies to, but that's what we're talking about today. And he points out that Apostle Paul and the founder of the church, John Calvin, inspire us with these thoughts. First of all, change does not come easily. And very importantly, that there's limits to mechanistic formulas. We can't just say, well, we just need to change the way we do this and it'll all get better. It's never that simple. And that also the thought that civil service for the common good is the most holy calling. Wow, I don't think I've ever heard that at church, but it's very applicable to what we're doing here. And he ended by saying that study and humility are essential to emulate the mind of Christ. So I start with these thoughts. But I want to digress just 1 minute before I get into the details. I want to talk about this idea of complexity just a little bit more. So we know the first bullet, we talked about this last week, that bringing coal, gas, and oil emissions, that is ending fossil fuel use, as far as we know now, we need to bring those emissions to net zero, or essentially zero. And that has to be a global goal. We're not going to defeat climate change. We don't know right now of any other magic bullet, no technology that's going to save us alone. Of course, those technologies will substitute for the fossil fuels, but we have to do that. And success is needed on all scales. The individual, just like Bruce just said, we as individuals it's very important that we embrace this ourselves in our individual actions, our local actions, state, national, and global. Because climate change mitigation is a complex system, and I have that in quotes now because we think of complexity, that's sort of a regular term we use all the time. We say, oh, that's really complicated. That's really complex. But in science, in mathematics, in physics, a complex system it's a rigorous concept that means there are ways to deal with it objectively, with mathematics, with logic, to solve these problems. And in order to, in fact, I want to say that, was it 2 years or 3 years ago, the Nobel Prize in Physics was given to two scientists who proved that climate change was in fact a complex system and it could be addressed by using that technology. So what's the big deal about it being a complex system? Well, complex systems are almost like magic. If there is a way to solve them, first thing you have to do is you have to engage all points of view in the solution. You can't say, well, I'm a Republican and this is the way I'm going to solve it. Or I have this particular belief and that's the way no, you have to embrace everybody's who has a legitimate point of view in the solution or it won't work. You also have to optimize competing objectives. So it turns out for climate change, we don't want to quit traveling. We don't want to raise our energy costs by a factor of 2. We don't want, some people are very sensitive to costs, other people are more sensitive to the effects it's having on the environment. We need to embrace and try to optimize all those things, which means nobody gets it all their way. So we have to have that balance. Another part of a complex system is we have to adapt to unexpected changes. These are called emergent events. We're going along and we think we're doing well, and then all of a sudden, Hamas attacks Israel, and the pricing of oil and natural gas are dramatically affected. And all of a sudden, all of our plans are turned upside down. Nobody predicted it. So you have to be ready for these changes and this uncertainty and to deal with it. It's inherent in the problem. And you have to stay the course to your goal. So you can't just make a plan and then walk away, because it's, as soon as you wake up the next morning and read the newspaper, something happened that changed your ideas and you have to adapt to it. So all of this is rolled up in a complex system. So you say, well, that's interesting, but what do I care? Well, I'm going to give you 3 examples. I may not get to all 3, but I'll definitely try to get to 2 of efforts that are going on. In the first one, we'll have to do with the city of Charlotte. So we're going to talk about the City of Charlotte's Sustainable Energy Action Plan. It's something that's meant to help us all deal with climate change in this region. And I want, while I do this, for you to think about, well, how it's a pretty successful program, by the way. So how does it be successful by appreciating this idea of complexity? And then we're going to talk a little bit about something at the state level, which is the Duke Energy Carbon Plan, which is a huge effort. It's been under development for 5 years and was just completed in December of last year. And it's going to continue on for a very long time. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And if we have time at the end, I'd like to talk about a very interesting thing that happened it's called the decade where we almost solved climate change, which was the 1980s, from 1980 to 1990. And, but we failed. And so we can think about why we failed, how we don't have to do that again. Okay, so with that, actually, I'm going to stay on that slide because I'm going to quit using slides and just talk to you. So the Charlotte Strategic Energy Action Plan in 2019, the city council decided that the city should address climate change. It turns out that 70% of all the emissions from 70% of all the greenhouse gas emissions, which is what causes climate change, occur within cities. That's interesting. You might have thought it was agriculture or big industrial processes, but it isn't. We're using a lot of energy. And so what the city did is they decided to look at 4 focus areas. Well, first of all, they have 2 goals. The first is to clean up the city government itself. But I clean up, I mean literally reduce carbon. And they wanted to do it in 4 areas. One is to take all the buildings and make them as efficient as possible and convert them if possible away from fossil fuels. The second goal was to work on their the transportation that they do. Not school buses, because they don't run in schools, but the city buses, all the municipal vehicles to make them carbon free. The third area was in energy generation. They were going to actually make deals to generate their own they're not going to become an electric power company, but they're going to form partnerships where they pay for clean energy to compensate for, that will essentially add up to all the energy that they actually use. The truth is they'll still pull it off Duke Energy lines, so it'll still have some pollution in it, but they've purchased clean energy to compensate 100% for that. That's their goal. And the fourth is workforce development, to make sure that we have people who understand this stuff and can repair the equipment, maintain it, and so that the city will be successful in those 4 areas. And since 2019, they've made significant progress. All of the city buildings are in a database where they put in all the relevant data that is relevant to how efficient they are in avoiding emissions. And then they take the worst offenders of those buildings, prioritize them, and clean those buildings up first. And so every year they take a group and they hope that program will eventually clean up all the buildings. The next is electric vehicles. 10% of the city buses are now all electric. And a great number more of them are hybrids, and they're making that change. And they've actually purchased they've created an arrangement with an energy provider and with Duke Energy, and they have an 80 megawatt solar farm in Rowan County, in Mooresville. And they've purchased that. 80 megawatts is a lot of power. So that's some very large percentage of the city's electric usage. And they had a deal for a second, even larger. That one sort of fell through, but I think they still have several years before they wouldn't achieve their goal. By the way, they want to achieve this goal of zero carbon for the city's own businesses by 2030. And then, so they've been very successful so far. The second part is harder, and that is to make us into the way they say it is, become a low carbon city by 2050. And that means they want to work with all of us to do our part to start to clean up. That's harder. And one of the things they've done is this Charlotte, you may have heard of the Charlotte Future 2040, which is an entirely new plan. And that is designed to help. They also have issued last year a mobility plan to house public transportation and trying to get people out of cars as much as possible. That plan is in place, and they also have a tree plan that they issued last year. And they've been recognized, they've got an A- as a global sustainable city. And they are a Bloomberg American Sustainable City. So Bloomberg gives an award to cities, and it comes with big money. So, well, enough money to really help them do this job as a grant from the Bloomberg Foundation. So that's what they're doing. So I've worked with them for the last 5 years on this as a citizen advisor and on review committees and so forth. And they are encouraging, they would like to have more participation. So if you go on their website, and at the end of this, I have all the references, you can actually take a survey, it's a several-page survey of your thoughts on what's important for climate change. And you can actually also read the plan on the internet. You can attend they have focus meetings for citizens in these different areas, buildings, transportation, energy, and so you can participate in that way. And they're going to use this, at least the first part of this year, to completely update their plan. So we can get involved. It's just an example of how we can reach out, we can take our interest and have a bigger impact. Anybody have any questions or thoughts on that one?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are there some other cities like our size who are like further ahead than we are, that like, you know, like what was it that was there something like culturally or?
Yeah, I think it is culturally. I would say Denver, Boston, maybe Austin, I'm not sure. Charlotte is a business city, you know. We think everything's on a spreadsheet, everything's cost benefit, return on investment. And that's not that we don't, it's not that our leaders and our business leaders don't care, but they have to be reminded more so than other cities. Where Boston is, they're very, it's a liberal city, but it's got 40 colleges or something, and there's a whole lot of people thinking about this all. They're way, Boston and Cambridge, they're way ahead. In Denver, for some reason, maybe it's their natural beauty that they see every day and they just cherish. But they seem to be better. So there are some, but there are a lot of cities doing well. Yes.
It seems like the light rail that the city did, years ago on South Boulevard was a huge benefit to the city development-wise in that area, and then also for reducing, people using less cars because they're on the light rail. So it seems strange to me that it just takes so long for a city to, every other city you go to, you land in the airport and you can hop on a light rail or a good way to go downtown. And Charlotte just doesn't have that. So is the city trying to prioritize that? Because if they did that, not only would it be good for the environment, but also it would be great for development on that corridor. So
yeah, they are. One of the problems with the city is that the cities in North Carolina are very weak. The state government controls much of what the city can do. So the city can't, and the city can't move ahead without federal and state funding to help, and they're limited in how quickly they can move. But you're right. I said to my wife the other day, I said, when we built that blue line, if we would have just borrowed a ton of money, and build up whole cities so that everybody had, and you could be like a European city where you zoom downtown, you transfer and you go out, without great delays. If we had done it, it would have paid for itself. Already it'd be paid for and we'd be thrilled. But
Where are we now with that? Where's the city?
They've
now?
expanded it.
well, the red line is approved, but within the city, but now we have to get state approval. And so that's gonna be many years before it's built. That would be a significant commuter line all the way up north. And then the Silver Line is planned, and that would go to the airport and go out to the east. But these are way in the future, you're right. We need to be doing it now.
But you remember how much people fought that when they wanted the blue line?
Oh, yeah.
It was ridiculous and, and they said, oh, we'll never make any money, it'll blah, 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 and almost immediately it became popular and a cost saver and an environmental saver. So I don't
It's
understand why.
ideas think about the idea of the complex system.
Yeah.
You've got to bring all the points of view in, and you've got to talk them out.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, I don't believe in it, I don't think it's gonna work. Listen,
One of the problems in Charlotte, and you think about this, and I mean, this is what the city does. The city business is pretty small compared to what needs to be done. You look at all those buildings downtown, they're not owned by the city. You look at all the big office buildings and so on all around, they're not owned by the city. They're owned by corporations. Corporations, because of us, shareholders, have this very short-term focus. It's about quarterly profits right now. If you do anything to hurt quarterly profits right now, we're gonna vote against the long term, and CEOs are gonna get kicked out, boards are gonna get changed. And so that mindset, it's one of the great beauties of capitalism, but it's also one of the great shortfalls of capitalism, is it really keeps you from making these long-term decisions. And so businesses, Charlotte, are really, what Duke Energy's doing, it's really tough for a company like Duke Energy. Everybody's looking for profits right now. They don't care about next year, or certainly don't care about 2050.
well, that's a great segue, because that's what we're gonna talk about next. So let's talk about that, because for the last 2 years, and actually it's been 5 years, but the last 2 have been focused on developing this carbon plan, where Duke Energy, actually it was we give Duke Energy credit for it, but it was actually a bipartisan bill. North Carolina, imagine that, a bipartisan energy bill, the end of 2021, called the carbon plan. And it said, you will achieve zero carbon electricity by 2050. That's required of the state in that bill. And they even gave us a 2030 interim goal. We'll be at a certain level by 2030, so we can't just sit around and wait.
Get it on last year.
So what happened? So, of course, Duke had to comply, and they had to go to the Utilities Commission. So they had to have a rigorous analysis and a rigorous report to say how they were gonna do this. And they did it. In the beginning of 2023, first of all, this idea about collaboration and listening and having competing objectives and optimizing, they took that very seriously. They had 6 months worth of public meetings where they invited what they call stakeholders. And a lot of these are business people. If you're a Bank of America, you're a stakeholder in Duke's future, because a lot of the money you're lending out there, it depends on the economy and ability to be a vibrant economy and so forth. So there's business people, there were environmental people, there are anybody, sometimes just citizens who were interested. And we had these stakeholder meetings for 6 months, where Duke was saying, this is what we're thinking of doing, tell us what you think of that. And then they spent another, maybe not quite 6 months, but doing a rigorous analysis, and I mean this is rigorous. This is this is a very, like I said, they gave a Nobel Prize for doing this work analytically. Well, Duke stepped up, and they have competent people doing this rigorous analysis. And what this analysis consists of is very sophisticated computer models. And what they do is they simulate the future. They say, okay, here's where we are, and here's where we need to be in 2030, and here's where we need to be in 2050. And we've got some people who care about electric costs, and some people who care about reliability, and some people who care about carbon cleanup. So we've got to balance all that. And so they look at alternative futures. They say, so what if we go this direction? And they calculate that all the way out to 2050. And they call that a digital twin. Have you ever heard that term? They take the real world today and they project fast forward what it would look like if they take these certain actions. And they project out literally hundreds of these scenarios. Because remember, complex system, there's a lot of uncertainty and it's unpredictable. We don't really know what the world's going to be like a year from now. So if we just say, well, we modeled it and a year from now, this is what it's going to be like. Well, no, it's going to be somewhere out here. So they model all these different things, which they did. And then they come up with a plan. And it's their action plan. But they're not allowed to just go home and do it. They have to go home and take baby steps. Let's take the first step and then let's evaluate how well is it going to do. So what they did, they've come up with a plan, and it's good in some respects. First of all, it has a great deal more solar energy in it than even Duke wanted. The commission pushed on them to do more. So we're going to get a lot more solar energy. We're going to get wind energy for the first time in North Carolina. We're going to get what they call storage, which is really a good thing because that way you can make clean energy, but if you can't use it, you can store it and then use it later. So it makes it much more efficient. And they're also going to do offshore wind, which is one of the first times, and there's only 2 or 3 offshore wind installations in the United States. Duke is committed to investigate that and hopefully do it. They're going to build advanced nuclear plants that are inherent. They're much, much safer. Not that the other ones were. And Duke's been operating nuclear plants for 50 years and no accidents, but nonetheless, these are even better and less of a concern. So that we're getting all that in this plan, and that's wonderful. Our rates are going to go up because it can't be free, obviously, but it's balanced. I would have wanted them to do a lot more, but because of cost and reliability concerns, we only got some of it. But what Duke didn't do was, because they just have this mindset, just like you said, they have this mindset of business, short term. They're not willing to take the risk. They're not willing to put a shovel in the ground and do this until they're virtually sure it's going to work. But they have to take some more chances. And the way you take chances is you make sure you have options. You make sure you don't go too far down the road and then decide it can't work. But they haven't done enough of that. But otherwise, they've done pretty well. Yes.
I keep hearing a lot about that plan, and I love your enthusiasm. But I guess I've never heard you say they were told to do this by the state. What's the penalty if they don't, or if they ask for a 30-year extension on that 2050? I think that one of the reasons I know people who are very involved in advocating for all the environment stuff, and pessimism has sunk in because they don't know like Gene said, if Duke says we can't because of cost or any other reason, I guess I haven't heard what the state could do to them if they don't do it.
It's
Do you
true,
know?
it's true.
Is there a punishment?
Yeah, and I'm enthusiastic, but if you go on the record, you'll see that my name is all over Curtis. I was not happy with what they did, and I told them, and they know it. So I'm enthusiastic because of what we got. But it's this idea of, you struggle, compromise, you get the best you can, and then you immediately start pushing again. And that's what we're doing. But you're right. I'll be honest with you, they missed the 2030 goal. So we're literally, in other words, we're gonna have more emissions until 2030. More emissions until 2030 before it starts to taper down. Well, that's not right. It's I don't even think it's legal. So I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm optimistic because, I'm part of the team, I want it to work, but, yeah, it's not good enough.
But the other side of that too, and maybe John, is that we want 24/7 access. You turn on the light switch or the
Yeah.
stove, you want as much as you can get, as soon as you can get it. Or you're willing to sacrifice some of that accessibility for the sake of of losing that quote freedom, unquote.
There were three things they had.
Brownouts.
There were three things they had to optimize. Cost, they're supposed to do it at the lowest cost they can do it. They have to maintain that ridiculously high reliability
Right.
that you said, and they have to meet the carbon goals, all three. Well, you can't do all three perfect, so you have to compromise. And unfortunately, we're set in our ways and we value cost and reliability so much that so who pays the price? Well, the carbon goal is paying the greatest price. But, so what I say is pay attention and be critical and, appreciate the difficulty of it, which it is. I want you to know that what I push for is for them to do an order of magnitude more of this sophisticated modeling. Because the modeling that they've done, they're telling us what it's going to be in 2 years and 5 years. And I don't believe, and it's not true. What we do know, it's not that they're lying, it's just that, for example, if you, by the way, weather is a complex system. Okay, and we all know about weather. So if you listen to your favorite meteorologist on television and he tells you that tomorrow's going to be sunny, you're probably going to say it's going to be sunny. If he tells you next Thursday is going to be sunny, you say, I don't know. So he's going to be right more often than he's going to be wrong. But if you go out another week, he has no idea. And that's the way this projection, it's no different. We think, well, Duke's smart, they understand power, they must be right. No, it's not that they're not lying, and it's not that they're not competent. It is an unpredictable system. We can't predict the future that far. So we have to leave options. And that's the way it works. That's the way complex systems work.
You have to absolutely believe that sometime in the next 10, 20, 30 years, some new technology that we've never thought about, somebody thought about maybe, is gonna come in, it's gonna change everything you think. If you don't believe it, just look at the world today and how everything that you thought a few years ago is different. And that's gonna really be true here. I actually think that this has to be a partnership between government and energy companies. If, for instance, what's going on in California right now is devastating. The cost across the economy, for insurance companies, it's gonna hurt insurance companies that serve people in North Carolina, it's gonna hurts everybody. But what's happening as a result of that says that government should have been very heavily involved in keeping that from happening. And don't just blame it on whomever, the water company, which is probably a government water company, but everybody wants to blame it on somebody, but we gotta be in this together because it
We
impacts
have
all
to
of
be in
us.
it together.
And we lose that.
Everybody wants it to work. There are no bad guys here, but there are people who are abusing their power or their influence. You've been my straight man. That brings us to the third. So we talked, so last week we talked about the individual and congregation. And then I said, here's what we're doing in the city of Charlotte. We're trying to do all this and we're making progress. And here's what we're doing in the state, North Carolina, with electricity, which by the way, it's a big deal because electricity accounts for 33% of all of the greenhouse gases emitted in North Carolina. 33% just from making electricity, not using it. It doesn't have any, when you turn it on, it doesn't emit any carbon, it's making it. And, but here's the important thing about electricity. The way everybody else is gonna clean up, how are you gonna clean up your automobile? You're gonna buy an electric automobile. So in order, and how are they gonna clean up dirty heating systems, gas, and even worse, methane or something, heating systems? They're gonna switch to electric. So everybody's switching to electric. Residential, transportation, corporations, industry. And so that 33% could grow to as much as 80%. So if Duke becomes zero, or whoever makes our electricity becomes zero carbon, that could be up to 80%, reducing 80% of all our emissions. So it's the biggest single thing we can do. So that's why I gave it as an example. Yes.
I'm confused. If electricity is 30% of the greenhouse gases, then why is all this being changed over to electricity? Isn't that gonna increase the amount of greenhouse gases put off by electricity?
No,
Or is it just
because-
a net?
No, because the electricity is already, half of our electricity is already carbon free. Because we have a lot of nuclear plants and we have solar. So and we have pump storage and things like that. So half of our electricity is already clean. And if we achieve these goals, next few years, it'll start to go down from 50 all the way to zero. So that's the plan, where if your car that you fill up with gasoline, it is 100% dirty, and it will be forever until you sell it and you get a cleaner car. So electricity is the best path we know. But I want to spend just a few minutes, I want to leave time for discussion. And I want to tell you a little bit. So we went to the city, and then we went to the state. Now let's talk about the nation, we as a nation. Back in 1980, there was a lobbyist. His name was Pomerantz, Raphael Pomerantz. He worked for Friends of the Earth in Washington, D.C. He was a lobbyist, trying to get Congress to do the right thing for the environment. He picks up a report from the Environmental Protection Agency, and the president then was Jimmy Carter. And it says, we're concerned about this, that we might be heating up the world with all this fossil fuel. We don't have enough data yet, but it looks bad, could be bad. Well, this lobbyist gets excited about it, and so he starts poking around. And you may have heard of a guy named Jim Hansen from NASA, who was an environmentalist. But back then, he was just a young guy who was concerned too, and he got Jim Hansen at NASA to care about it, and he got the president's, Jimmy Carter's science advisor, a guy named Frank Kress, to care about it. And so they said, we need to look at this more seriously. So they hired this MIT professor, happened to be one of my professors, it's kind of cool, isn't it? To run this big study and find out if this was true. And he came out and he said, oh yeah, it's really true. And the only solution is to quit burning fossil fuels. And that took about 3 years to get to that point. And so then they tried to get Congress to take it up. And that's when Al Gore, he was the big climate change guy. He started getting interested. At that time, he was a representative. So he starts having hearings and he's bringing in like oil companies and everything. And believe it or not, at that time, the mid-80s, the oil companies were okay with this. They said, yeah, if this is a problem, we need to work on it. They were open about it. And so we had all the stakeholders in the room and everybody started. Now, at that time, it was Ronald Reagan then became president, and he just doesn't like the government taking on all these things. So it kind of slowed down, but it never stopped. It progressed throughout the Reagan administration, and it got to the point where, and it happened. I'm going to take too much time, so I won't get into the sidebars. But all of a sudden, there's a lot of momentum for this, and they said we need. So the United Nations got wind of all this, and they formed this International Panel for Climate Change, the Intergovernmental Panel, IPCC. You've heard. They've met every year since 1987 or something, and they're the International Authority on Climate Change. So that was formed at that time. They said we need a treaty, a global treaty to reduce climate change. And they modeled it after, you remember when the hole in the ozone, well, that was a much smaller problem, and it didn't have anything to do with climate change, but it had to do with dangerous radiation coming in through the hole in the ozone. So they formed an international treaty, and they solved it in like 3 years. And so they wanted to model on that, and they wanted to get an international treaty for climate change. And they got they got the United Nations and all the countries to get together in, I think it was the Netherlands or someplace in Northern Europe. They all came together and they were just ready to form to get a treaty to reduce climate change. And the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and Japan got together in a smoke-filled room and said, "This is too dangerous. We don't know. This could ruin us." So they boycotted it. That was the end of it. So it didn't work.
Ended where it began.
What? Pardon me?
It ended where it began.
It ended where it began. But so we might say, well, maybe next time. Well, the next time actually happened. The last 4 years, we've done a lot of things for the climate. Judge whether they were worth it or whether they were good things, but we've done a lot of things. I think I wrote some of them down, and then I promise I'll quit after that. First of all, the United States recommitted to the IPCC Paris Agreement, which we withdrew from. We set greenhouse gas emission limits to try to achieve a 50% reduction by 2030. We proposed regulations on greenhouse gas emissions from power plants, automobiles and trucks, as well as oil wells. Oil wells emit a lot of methane, which is a greenhouse gas. And In addition, Congress funded tax credits and subsidies and other incentives to create clean energy businesses and jobs. We have a lot of clean energy businesses in North Carolina. And also for buying electric vehicles and for new research and development for those new technologies that you were pointing out. So we're back.
We're getting ready to stop again.
Well, we are, but
We're back where we started.
hopefully we will endure it. So I wanted to give you those three examples. Because they show it's hard. It's complicated, it's complex. But we can have a role. And I hope I can get this thing to start up again on that. Okay.
I'm
Yes.
wondering if, we have about 5 minutes
Yeah,
left.
I'm
I'm
done.
wondering if, oh, no, you're fine. I'm wondering if maybe we can just do some Q&A and can we bring the questions as part of the session next week? What do you think? Or if you think
Sure.
5 minutes, I just don't wanna, 5 minutes doesn't seem like a whole lot of time to talk about some really important stuff. Can we maybe start here next week, but maybe just spend the last few minutes with
Yeah,
Q&A, or is there anything you wanna?
We're actually done. All I did was just pose this final question on, okay, how can we as individuals leverage these bigger things? And so I just list some things you can do. And
Okay,
so they don't need a lecture on it.
but they may have questions.
Yeah. Well, they've been great with their questions so far. That's why I'm late.
I have a question.
Yes.
With all your projections that you're talking about they're doing, is there a projection as to just how many more years we have until we've gotten to the point of no return?
Yeah. Well, no return that's a pretty scary question, but we tried to reach 1.5 degrees centigrade increase in average global temperature. We said if we could reach that 2050, we could probably avoid the worst consequences. We can no longer reach that. We've lost that opportunity. So now we're trying for 2 degrees, but it looks like it's going to be more close to 3 degrees. So if we don't do more, we're going to be at 3 degrees. And if you think these fires and floods and hurricanes and so forth are bad now, as well as just the change in our loss of species, evolutionary changes that are just things that are happening so much faster than species can evolve for, we will face that.
So
There was an
that would be
article-
what you would call a point of no return?
Well, I'm not gonna
If it's
call it that.
I mean, the thing is, it's kind of like the apocalypse language, like, there is no Edenic past we're going back to now. Now it's about managing where we're going and slowing what has been a rampant rise in, I actually got this on my phone, it was yesterday, the day before, 2024, first year to pass 1.5 centigrade global warming.
Yeah, so we've passed, well, we did it 1 year, whether
Right.
the averages or not, we're
Yeah.
not sure, but yeah, we're already past. So trying to get to this point of no return. The only one thing I will say about that is you can't go, it's like a ratchet. Once you are at this level, it isn't good, even if tomorrow we fixed it, we would be where we are.
Yeah.
We would have to deal with problems we have now, and it's gonna take centuries to get it back. So every time you ratchet up, you're gonna stay there, even if you all of a sudden find some miraculous solution. So,
Jim, and then I think Clark and.
okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
One critical thing that I have in mind, right now, there's a critical number of people in the country who, first of all, don't believe in science. Second, they don't want the government to tell them what to do. and third, their voters. How can we get the message, how can we get the message through schools, colleges, advertising? How can we somehow work toward getting these people into this concept?
That's what we're here for, yeah, to help answer those questions after. I don't know what happened that made people not believe in science, for example. What was your other one, besides the vote?
Well, they don't believe in science and they don't want the government telling them.
Oh, they don't
what
want
to
the
do.
government to tell them what to do, but this whole idea about, so don't let the government tell you what to do, but sit down and talk it out. Listen to different people's opinions. Yeah, the government doesn't need to be the enemy.
Right.
They can be your, well, they're not supposed to be, and I don't think they are.
Well, the answer is education. How do we educate
Yeah.
more people to get on board?
Yeah. Well, that's, all of you are as good an expert at that as I am, and I don't know.
One of the things that's been said for these next 4 years is that we really need to be focused locally on what we're doing. And I even say one, and when I say local, congregationally, right? I mean, that's where we really can be spending our effort and our time as a congregation dealing with this. And then, from there, hopefully the tentacles will grow and, we will educate more people, or we'll just be stronger in our voice in what we know is our faithful response to this issue. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump out of.
Oh, you're
shape,
fine.
but-
No, you're fine. We'll get Clark. and
Go
then
ahead.
one more.
John, what countries have done the best job of helping people understand what needs to be done and doing it?
I think the countries are so different that they've all done it in a different way. This is how we do things. In the United States, we fight with each other and we argue and we call each other names. They don't do that so much in Europe. So they look like they're doing a better job, and they are at the moment ahead, but they're starting to get a little frazzled. And I hear people say, well, China's doing such a bad job that it doesn't matter what we do, because they're so big and they're so growing so quickly, they're gonna destroy us anyway. That's not true. The Chinese have done more for climate change than any other country. But they've also done more damage because they're so big. But they have huge number of electric vehicles and they're not, and although they're continuing to build fossil plants, they're also building more nuclear plants and more clean plants than anybody else. So it's hard to, we gotta quit looking for villains. But you weren't looking for a villain, you were looking for a role model. And I think you can learn from all of the countries. Study what they're doing and take a piece that would be acceptable in your culture and do it.
There was a stat that I saw today, and so y'all can correct me if this is not true. But it was something like so far this year, like in the first 15 days, that this top 1% of wealthy people have used up more carbon than the bottom 50% of people in the world will use the rest of the year. I don't know if that's true, but I feel like it kind of frames when we're talking about all these countries, we're probably in the top 1%, so just the way we fly around and all of this is really
Absolutely.
an offset large amount of the problem.
Yeah, I can't say what the exact numbers are, but you're right. And one point I was gonna make on that, if I had more time to talk about that decade, we have emitted more greenhouse gases since 1990 to the present than all of civilization had before. So if we had stopped it then, or begun to stop it then, that to me is inconceivable, but it's true.
Clark, and then Gina have the last.
Yeah, my question, about other cities in the country. So here in North Carolina, we basically, Duke has a monopoly. We don't have a choice. That's our only way to get energy. I have a friend that was Houston. She can choose from 5 different companies that offer energy. And, you know, if Duke had competition and they had to do something, had to, you know, keep up with this other company, I think it would be beneficial. So like Denver, do they have a competitive environment there for energy or not?
Believe it or not, there may be an exception that I don't know about, but the regulated monopoly companies like Duke do as well in cost and environment and so forth as the companies that have a competitive environment. There doesn't seem to be a statistical difference. But it's because they're a monopoly, but they're a very regulated monopoly. They have very strict guidelines that they have to follow. I mean, I'm not saying that means changes, but I'm just saying that it isn't, there's not a glaring difference.
Okay.
I was just thinking about a question about, you know, carbon offsets. So it's kind of a cop-out, it strikes me. So instead of me doing what I can to lower carbon costs or to lower carbon, I'll just buy offsets. And then somebody else is doing the right things. I'm taking advantage of what they're doing.
Yeah, be careful. Those offsets are mostly not true.
That's what I'm thinking.
You can, the gas companies are doing this now because they don't have a good solution for cleaning up gas. So you can actually, like Georgia Power, I watch a lot of Atlanta baseball, so I see Georgia Power ads all the time. They're always telling people, sign up for this offset program and you're clean. You can use all the gas you want. And what happens is, yeah, you sign up and then Georgia Power sends a few bucks to some company that plants a few trees somewhere. And they claim that that offsets it, but they're not really correct. There are some good offset programs, but for the most part, they're not, they're like you say, they're deficient. Yes.
I'm just wondering if we could learn from the city how they evaluate their buildings. Could we evaluate our buildings?
Yeah, in fact, the city has I think I don't know how fast they're rolling it out, but they're gonna provide such a capability for everybody to do their building. I don't think it'll get down to the residences, but for big buildings, for significant big buildings, they're doing that.
So
That's part of their plan, but I don't think it's quite rolled out yet.
So Lou, one of the things the outdoor ministry is considering is just to do a sustainability project here on campus and to ask those questions. You know, how are we doing in our buildings? So it is something that we're hoping to do in the next short term.
And y'all nailed it Sunday. So I know you. Just think of all those carbon footprints you reduced.
Unfortunately, it's just blowing cold air.
Oh.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you all for staying. We are a few minutes over, but next week, bring some extra warm clothes.
Yeah, we might be outside for a little while.
So we'll be a fire.
Bruce's idea,
Yeah, this is outdoor ministry. So we'll meet in here.
It'll be short term.
Yeah, we'll meet in here and have some time together, and then we'll maybe go on a walk, and there may or may not be a fire pit.
Yeah.
So it's supposed to be really, really cold next Wednesday, but according to John, the weatherman don't know what they're talking about.
Just be prepared, I'm aware of that.
Yeah, they're calling for a snowpocalypse, but you know, we might just get another dusting and some ice, so.
We'll make the fire really big.
But as you leave, maybe spend a moment thinking about what it would mean, not just a faithful response, but a meaningful contribution on a scale. You know, Mary was talking about the sort of butterfly, this sort of ripple effect of things. So I hope this week brings some opportunities to make some ripples.
I would just ask you to think about, be able to report next week what you've done differently
Ah.
between now and then in your behavior pattern to affect your carbon footprint.
There you go, Bruce is gonna put you in the spot.
Challenge.
Does that
Kill
mean we
me.
all walk to church?
There you go.
Take that from me. Y'all take care. Stay warm.
Yeah, but you do that anyway.
Those of you that hate the vegetarian chili, you can put that in the column.
Oh, yeah, I did.
Put that in the column.